Hello, tango tribes around the world. This is Drago's Tango Alley, and this is your host, Alejandro Drago. And the subject of today's video will be Etude number 4 from Piazzolla's Six Etudes for Solo Flute or Violin. In presenting Etude number 4, we will do the analysis and the demonstration along the Etude instead of doing it in absolutely two separate sections. One thing I wanted to point out is that Etude number 4 is particularly illustrative as to the manner of ornamentation and rhythmic variation proper to tango phrasing in general, but very specifically in Piazzolla's music. So we will devote to this some extra time. So what we will do is pick every little section of the etude, showing it with likely a display of the music on screen, and then discuss some formal and structural characteristics of each section and how they relate to each other. So without further ado, let's proceed to the music. Well, the etude has three big sections, and each of them is subdivided into some subsections. What we just heard is something that I dubbed as the A section of the A section, or of the first section of three that the etude has. And it consists basically in a motif repeated three times with a certain degree of variations. That's why I've dubbed them A apostrophe, and A bis. So the logic is that we have this descending fifth and then ascending back again. The difference between A and A apostrophe or A prima is that the descending element is chromatic in the second case, and also that once the top note is reached at the end of A prima, is not taken again by a new motion from the E. So if in the first case we have this additional fifth, mi, si, we don't have it on A prima, otherwise they are identical. A little bit more of a substantial difference happens at the third iteration of this motif, which I have dubbed A bis, because the intervals change from a diatonic scale into an arpeggio, and the motif ends on an E, which is clearly the tonic of the tonality, E minor, even though there is no F sharp at the key signature. So this slightly varied repetition of motif A in the form of A prima, and A bis serves as our A section. You may notice that I squared the first iteration. It says compare with C-B. We will go to that in a minute. For now, let's go to what I have classified as the B section. B section, we have a little cycle within it. The initial and the final elements of the B section um, here, which I again dubbed B and B bis, are essentially identical, and the only difference between them is the same as between A and A prima, namely that the descending gesture is chromatic, which is indicated, it's been circled in green in the B bis section. So we have this B and B bis sort of framing an element that I dubbed B plus, in which we have the usual long note descending gesture ta 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 ta, and then an ascending gesture ta ra ra, this V shape followed by a long pickup ta 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 ra ta ra, right? But there is an element that hadn't appeared so far. It is squared in light blue, is the second of the three squares, and this is an element that anticipates or foretells the element that I have classified as omega. So this is this structure of a fixed voice and a moving voice in neighboring steps. When we reach omega, which happens twice, we'll see that it's realized slightly different, but this element in B plus anticipates omega. So we have B, B plus with this element of anticipation, and B bis, which is essentially the same as B. Now, again, notice that I indicated compare with CA and compare with CC. And we will see that the element that comes after this, the C element, seems to be made actually out of parts of A and B, but it has its own autonomy, and that's why I classified it separately. So let's listen to the element C now. Well, we are at section C now. Now, section C, if we look at it, here it is. Here. We notice that there are three gestures, and each of them seems to be copied or modified based on some motive that was already offered either in section A or B. For example, if we take the element C-A, the first of them, then easily you can correlate it with F. It's just one step up or down. The rhythmic, did I say F? I mean B, sorry. So my mistake. With B, the first of the three B elements, right? So it's essentially the same. If you look at C-B, it is almost identical to A, with the difference that we have an intervallic structure that is more akin of an arpeggio. So the span of the motion in CB is bigger, but the melodic and rhythmic structure is identical. By the way, I have to point out that in the French edition, this is mistakenly reproduced as 16ths without any indication of change of rhythm. It doesn't make absolutely any sense. So it's clearly a misprint, okay? And then going to C-C, well, you can correlate to B bis, even in the glissando gesture. Something that I forgot to mention in section B, it was right there, those red squares. is something that I hinted at in previous videos, which is that chromatic scales in Q notes in these etudes are more or most logically rendered on the violin by means of glissandi. If you think of a bandoneon or even a clarinet or a flute, then those instruments are deprived of the possibility of a perfect glissando as a string instrument, and the closest approximation you can have is a very fast and well slurred chromatic scales. So if that is an approximation and you have the real thing, so to say, there is no point in sticking to the approximation. That's why the three spots in this analysis that are marked with the red square are meant to be played as glissando. Okay, so now, as I was saying, if C is entirely derivative, right? If C is composed of elements that are slightly modified units of previously existing material, why do I classify it as a standalone section? Well, first of all, because of the character of progression that the harmony has. So even though the melodic and rhythmic structure doesn't offer new material, because that material has been presented already in A or B, it has nevertheless new harmonic value in terms of how the progression evolves harmonically. But more importantly, we will have this very structure presented twice more, and examining the differences between C apostrophe or prima and C double apostrophe or double prima will teach us a lot about variation and ornamentation in the melody in tango. So that having been said, let's move on now to the wrapping up the closing section of this big A, which I dubbed Omega. There is not a lot to say about Omega, yet it's a very interesting and characteristic section. If you look at the outline that I've presented, you will see something that is fairly obvious, which is this is built on the descending gestures. The second note is always a little shorter, so there has this kind of lamenting or sorrowful character or reflective, as you wish. If we take the odd and the even notes to represent different voices, you can see a very clear outline of the even voices being one pitch per bar, and in turn creating a cadential sequence. Mi, re, do, si, mi, right? And then there is a secondary voice made out of the even notes, which creates a little bit of a chromatic descending motion by the beat. Okay, so basically you have that outlined graphically there. It's by its repetitive and formulaic character, then it's something that emphasizes mood over anything particularly thematic or structural. However, I mentioned in element in section B, sorry, that there was a certain anticipation. So we had something similar. There was a diatonic movement of the odd voice and a static non-movement of the odd voice. Somehow that gesture foretells this omega element, which we will encounter again. And with this wrapping or coda-like section omega, I don't know why I picked omega. I just knew that I wanted to use something different from Latin letters. Be as it may, with this omega section, the big A section wraps up and we enter into what would be the central section of Etude number 4. The central section of the Etude begins with what I have dubbed the T motif. T stands for thirds. The T motif will reappear a little later, but the second half will be different. So this one is T and T1, and the other one will be T and T2. We can appreciate that T1 and T and T1 clearly stay within a strong sense of E minor, right? And it consists of just two ascending motions in thirds up to certain notes. So no big news here. It conveys a certain sense of tonality, but a diluted one, right? The harmonic coloristic content is more important than any functionality or even a melody. It's a color. So section T plus T1 contrasts with a new iteration of section C. So section C that we studied in the main first big section of the Etude reappears with some variations. Let's examine that. Section C prima, or C apostrophe, happens in the same tonality as section C, but there are rhythmic variations. Now, instead of analyzing these variations right here, I would wait until C double prima or C double apostrophe, my English today, happens to present all three variants, and then we will have more time, we will devote more time and we'll have a better opportunity to discuss it. Well, so as I said, C prima happens, so a slightly rhythmically varied form of the motif C. And then we go back to T with a slight difference in its second half. So let's listen to the reiteration of the T motif. Well, as we can see, the re-exposition of the T motifs starts identical to T1, but then it develops into something slightly different. A sequence of thirds that, starting with F, insinuates some sort of F major or A minor, only to go back to some sort of E minor. Nothing is really very strictly functional here, but the shift of the half tone at the start of the motif that I dubbed T2 renews our harmonic perception of this and leads into the closing element of the central section. So since I use a Greek letter for the closing element of the first section, I decided to use another Greek letter for this one, so I call it psi. So let's hear it. Well, section psi that ends the central section, it's interesting on a number of accounts. One is that it represents a gesture that appears in a number of slow um, pieces by Piazzolla, pieces of a contemplative or meditative character. Five Tango Sensations comes to mind, some parts of the Bandoneon Concerto as well. Um, uh, Many things, particularly in the last 10 years of his work, to which, strictly speaking, this collection belongs to, things with his second quintet. So there is this sort of drifting gesture. It repeats, notes move, but you don't quite sense a direction because um, the uh, the motion itself is more important than the destination of such a motion. In fact, note that this psi section seems to land us on some sort of G tonic, maybe G major. You cannot even say because there is no B there to establish major or minor. You may say that the E flat hints to a minor, but the last notes you hear is D, 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 G, and that's all you're left to make an oral decision as to what the tonality is, if you will make such a decision. That's one regard in which this is interesting. Another one is that if you look at the structure of psi, then it would seem to be like a stretched out form of omega, right? It's like you take one of the units of omega, in which, if you remember, we have a steady note, usually represented by odd notes, and a moving chromatic voice, descending moving chromatic voice, represented by the even notes. And we have that 4 times, right? I'll put omega now on the screen as well so that you can compare. And then in psi, we have just the D, a steady D, and this lower voice moving almost to another D. And then it has E flat, C sharp, D, and then it resolves into C. So there seems to be a correlation in the design of these motifs. So that finishes the central section, and now we have the re-exposition, which is highly shortened and modified. Let's listen to the re-exposition of the motif A. Well, this is the re-exposition of the main motif of the first section. And you remember that we had 3 iterations of the A motif, A apostrophe, and A bis. Here we have only 2, and I call the second one A bis prima. I thought that the characteristic ending of the A bis marked the main difference, ending on E instead of B. Then, of course, we have this combination of the augmented fourth and the chromatic da 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 da. So a little chromatic expansion. So it retakes a little bit of the element that differentiates between A and A prima, namely the chromatic element down, as opposed to diatonic, but the ending is as in A bis. So basically, with 2 iterations, he collects characteristics of the 3 iterations of the exposition. It is worth noticing that once again, and not for the last time, there is a rhythmic misspelling in the French edition, and this shouldn't surprise us. In fact, even on Isaïe sonatas, if you check, there are plenty of rhythmic misspellings, and it's music that has been around now for close to a century. Apparently, nobody felt that they had to correct anything. I mean, obvious rhythmic mistakes. So, be as it may, the pattern here is quite consistent and evident, so we can correct it easily. So, let's move on. Well, perhaps from the point of view of what we can learn from this etude, this is one of the most important and interesting moments. So we will stay here for some further analysis. Um, so what is happening here? The motive or the collection of motives that I dubbed C. Now you see that there was a good reason not to treat them as a sort of puzzle made out of simply variations of other motifs. This collection, with this particular harmonic progression that is intrinsic to the motif C in all its variants, has a development of its own. So the first two things that strike compared to the other two C's, the original C and the C apostrophe, is, well, first of all, that all of a sudden it is a major second up. So we are not in E minor, but in F sharp minor. The second very obvious motive is this fast passage closing figure, one that, by the way, is very bandoneonistic, very bandoneonistic. But I think that it would be a good idea now to switch to the screen video and look at the three versions side by side. Let's do that. Okay, well, here we have the three versions of C side by side. I had to do some graphic manipulation in order to have them lined up maximally well, but it wasn't entirely possible. Perhaps it's worth attempting this with, say, Finale and reproducing all three versions. They all begin with the same kind of pickup, right? And I remind you that this version, the C double prima, is a major second up. And notice how interesting that they arrive at the same note here, down. Of course, considering the different tonality of the first version, but it's the same note in its tonality. But look at the rhythmic differences. This is an even rhythm. This is a fermata with a triplet, which is still a measured rhythm. And here we have a long note with grace notes. So there is one thing for you. Let's see if we can get rid of this. Can we get rid of this? Yes, we can. Okay. Then how we go to the topmost note in the second half. This is done fast and fast here through 16s. Here we have a more lyrical collection of eighths. However, the pickup, which is an eighth in these two cases into the next bar, is a 16th here, right? So on this side, we are more lyrical. On this side, we are more energetic rhythmically. Then again, in the next motion downward, you may remember the V-shape concept that I outlined a couple of minutes ago. We have absolutely three different ways of arriving at this note. we have this rhythm, and this rhythm. And they are known patterns, actually. They are known patterns in tango. Yet again, you know, going into this would take a separate video probably, which is in the making. But for now, I just want you to pay attention to these contrasting patterns of rhythmic descent, all while the ascending pattern is identical in all three versions here. And then in the resolution of the motif is where we see the biggest differences. If in versions C and C prima we have some way of coming down to this note, either by even eighths or with this what I call dam rhythm, in which you retain the motion in one note and then you liberate the motion. Dee, ta 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 ta, right? So all possible versions, and then we arrive at this note. Then we complete the V shape. Oh, haven't cleaned all my annotations, sorry. Again, with the upward motion, which is different in rhythm. Again, we have something similar to this here. You see? So we go up in a slower motion. We use eighths here, but then on the pickup side, we use a shorter note, a 16, right? So you can see another pattern in action here, right? So this contrasts with this. So the same deal, slower upward motion compared to the 16th, but a shorter pickup, a 16th, contrasted with an eighth here, right? So, well, all this was fine and dandy about C and C prima. But the third time, and the culmination of the third time, is a point in which way too much, so to say, melodic and motivic tension has accumulated. So there is this virtuosic, capricious gesture spanning over slightly more than an octave, this one. So we don't even take the time to come down from the top note. We just hold the top note. So in previous similar gestures, in what I call the dam rhythm, we hold, or we held more exactly, we held even here, and then some faster sequence of notes takes us down to our target note, okay? Well, not here. This time we just hold, and instead of leading into some lower register note, we deliver this big, virtuosic, capricious gesture and resolve here in the target note. So after this bandoneonistic gesture and the high G sharp, you can consider that this was the culmination of the etude in dramatical terms. And as I said, going over how exactly the rhythm is modified and ornamented the melody would take a separate collection of etudes, one that will be undertaken this year through Eurindia Edizioni and its Tango Academy. So for a more general information on those topics, I suggest that you stay tuned and consider subscribing to those videos in which this will be analyzed in more detail and also on a wider basis of material, not narrowly the etudes by Piazzolla. So at this point, pretty much everything is done and said, but it is interesting that Piazzolla decided to, just for the last 6-7 bars, move a tone up to F sharp minor, and the etude indeed finishes in F sharp minor with a new iteration of the omega motif Also, a whole tone, major second up, with just a mere difference in how the last note is resolved. Let's listen to it. Well, that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned useful skills and approaches based on this video. We still have etudes number 5 and 6 that have fascinating accentuation patterns and elements of melodic and harmonic invention. So we will have to work hard on those two. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay positive, stay active, and stay productive. See you next time.